The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, vast, rugged, and cloaked in dense forests that stretch for hundreds of miles. In the early 1990s, a small group of U.S. soldiers was assigned to conduct a multi-day survival training mission in one of the most remote sections of this range. The mission was supposed to test endurance, navigation, and team cooperation in difficult terrain. But what none of them could have known was that this particular exercise would become one of the most disturbing and unforgettable chapters of their lives. It began like any other assignment. A convoy dropped the squad off on a dirt road that wound deep into the wilderness. The men joked, slung their packs over their shoulders, and checked their rifles. Their orders were simple: move 10 miles through the forest, navigate with only compass and map, survive off the land, and rendezvous with another unit on the far side of the ridge within 3 days. Easy enough for soldiers trained to endure worse. At first, the air was crisp and refreshing. The canopy above was so thick it blocked most of the sunlight, giving the ground below a dim, twilight-like glow. Leaves crunched under their boots, and the distant call of a crow echoed through the hills. But the deeper they hiked, the more the atmosphere began to change. The sounds of the forest grew faint, as if something had hushed the land itself. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to die. By the time they set up their first camp, the men already felt a strange weight in the air. "Quiet night," one soldier muttered, stirring his coffee over the fire. Another replied, "Too quiet." They laughed it off, but their voices carried unease. Training missions were tough, but they had never experienced silence like this before, an unnatural stillness that pressed in from every side. As the night grew darker, the forest seemed to swallow their small firelight. Every shadow between the trees looked deeper, darker, as though hiding something just beyond their vision. One private claimed he saw movement, a tall, thin figure darting between the trees, but the others brushed it off as nerves. After all, exhaustion and darkness could play tricks on the mind. The next morning, they pressed forward. The terrain grew harsher, forcing them to climb steep ridges and push through thick undergrowth. As they marched, they noticed signs that unsettled even the most experienced among them. Trees bore long, jagged claw marks far higher than any bear could reach. Branches snapped and bent in unnatural patterns, almost as if something had deliberately marked the forest. Then there were the bones. At first, they found small ones, rabbits, squirrels, stripped clean and left in piles. Later, they stumbled on the carcass of a deer, its ribcage cracked open as if something had torn it apart with immense strength. One soldier, scanning the remains, muttered under his breath, "That wasn't set wolves." The squad leader ordered them to keep moving. He reminded them this was Appalachia, full of legends and ghost stories meant to scare kids, moonshine tales of skinwalkers, strange beasts, and old curses. But inside, each of them knew this was different. These weren't old campfire stories. Something had marked this land, and whatever it wasn't human. By the second evening, morale had begun to slip. The men were trained professionals, but survival training was designed to strip them of comfort, to push them into raw endurance mode. They had expected the hardship, but not the dread that seemed to grow with each passing hour. When they stopped for water at a stream, one of the soldiers noticed his compass needle twitching erratically. At first he thought it was broken, but then another checked his own, and it spun the same way, wild, jittering, refusing to point north. That discovery rattled them more than anything so far. Without a compass, navigation in the Appalachian wilderness was nearly impossible. Still, they trusted the map, the stars, and their instincts. They told themselves equipment failure was common. But deep down, each of them felt the creeping suspicion that something unseen was toying with them, bending even the laws of nature. That night, as they gathered around their campfire, the forest seemed to close in tighter. One man swore he heard whispering voices just beyond the tree line, like wind moving through the leaves, only it wasn't wind. Another claimed he saw two glowing eyes low to the ground, watching from the shadows, only to vanish when he blinked. The squad leader did his best to maintain order. "Stay sharp, stay calm. This is just another mission," he reminded them. But even he felt the gnawing weight of unease. The forest was not right. The silence was not right. And deep in his gut, he feared the worst, that they were not alone. The soldiers tried to sleep, but the night was restless. Branches cracked, something heavy moved in the underbrush. Once a scream tore through the distance, so piercing, so unnatural, that it froze every man in place. It wasn't the cry of a man, nor the howl of any animal they had ever heard. It was something else entirely, something that carried hunger and rage. From that point on, the mission was no longer about training. It became survival, against the elements, against the unknown, and against whatever ancient terror was stalking them in those endless woods. And though none of them spoke the word aloud, one thought began to take root in their minds, fed by every eerie sound and every shadow they saw moving through the trees. Wendigo. The next morning, the squad pushed further into the Appalachian wilderness. At first light, the forest looked deceptively calm. Mist rolled low across the ground, curling around the bases of the trees like pale smoke. The sunlight barely filtered through the dense canopy overhead, and every beam of light that slipped through seemed swallowed by shadows. The soldiers marched in silence. The easy banter they'd shared the day before was gone, replaced with a quiet unease. The silence of the woods was still there, too perfect, too absolute. No birdsong, no rustling of squirrels or deer. Just the crunch of boots on leaves and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. For seasoned men who had trained in forests across the country, it was unnerving. Forests were never this quiet unless something was very, very wrong. By midday, they stopped for a short rest. One soldier leaned against a tree, then quickly pulled back. The bark was shredded with deep gouges, long slashes that raked down nearly 6 feet of the trunk. At first glance, they looked like claw marks, but the height disturbed them most. Bears could climb, sure, but these gouges were so high that even a black bear on its hind legs couldn't have reached them. "Looks like something big," one of the privates muttered. "Too big," another whispered back. Their sergeant gave a sharp order to keep moving, brushing it off as old storm damage, but his eyes lingered on the marks longer than he should have. He wasn't convinced either. As they trekked deeper, more signs appeared. Branches bent and twisted, not broken by wind, but almost deliberately shaped, like someone or something had woven them into crude symbols. One soldier swore he saw a formation that looked like a circle, marked with sticks and bones at its center. Another found what appeared to be a pile of stones stacked unnaturally in the middle of a clearing. The forest wasn't random anymore. It felt designed, as if invisible hands had been arranging it. But the most disturbing discovery came an hour later. Near a ravine, they found the remains of a deer. Its rib cage had been ripped wide open, the bones stripped clean of meat. The way the body lay seemed wrong, as if it had been placed there for them to find. The head was missing entirely, and surrounding the carcass were dozens of tiny bones, birds, rabbits, squirrels, all arranged in a pattern that no natural predator would leave behind. The men stared at it in silence. "Wolves don't do that," one said. "Neither do bears," another replied. For the first time, no one had an explanation. They moved on quickly after that, but the forest only grew stranger. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, their compasses jittered in their hands, spinning slightly, refusing to settle on true north. The squad leader barked that the equipment was faulty, but privately, every soldier wondered the same thing. What if it wasn't the equipment? What if the forest itself was wrong? By late afternoon, the atmosphere had become suffocating. The silence pressed on them like a physical weight. They started to hear things, faint cracks, low whispers, the sound of movement just out of sight. Every time they turned, there was nothing there. As they made camp that evening, tension was high. They built a small fire, but its light felt swallowed by the darkness beyond. One soldier sat sharpening his knife, eyes darting nervously into the trees. Another clutched his rifle close, finger tapping the trigger guard like he expected something to leap out at any moment. And then came the noise. It started faint, almost like wind through the branches, but there was no wind. The sound grew into something else, a low, guttural growl rolling through the forest around them. The men froze, gripping their weapons, scanning the tree line, but the growl didn't come from one direction. It seemed to echo from everywhere at once. Then silence again. One of the younger privates whispered, "We sit not alone out here." No one argued, Just before dawn, one soldier on watch swore he saw movement, something tall, gaunt, moving on two legs, weaving between the trees just outside the fire's glow. He said it stopped and stared at him, its eyes glowing faintly red in the dark. When he blinked, it was gone. He didn't tell the others until morning, but when he finally did, they believed him more than they wanted to admit. By the end of their second day, the squad knew for certain something in those woods was watching them. Something intelligent, something that wanted them to see the signs. The claw marks, the twisted trees, the bones arranged in patterns, the unnatural silence. These weren't set warnings. There were messages, and the soldiers were beginning to realize that those messages were meant for them. Night had fallen over the Appalachian forest, and the soldiers huddled close around their small campfire. The flames flickered weakly, doing little to push back the heavy darkness pressing in from all sides. Every snap of a twig or rustle in the underbrush made them jump. The squad had grown used to the unsettling quiet of these woods, but tonight felt different. The air was colder. Their breaths came out in white puffs. Even the fire seemed to burn lower, like the darkness itself was choking it. Private Collins sat sharpening his knife, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Next to him, Ramirez muttered under his breath, a prayer he thought no one could hear. The sergeant, hard-eyed and steady, tried to keep the group calm, but even his hands gripped his rifle tighter than usual. The stillness shattered with a sound none of them had heard before. It began like a scream, high, shrill, and human. But as it echoed through the trees, the scream warped, dropping into a guttural, inhuman growl that rattled their bones. It came from the east, then from the west, then from everywhere at once. The soldiers sprang to their feet, rifles raised, scanning the blackness. "What the hell was that?" whispered Collins. The sergeant raised a hand for silence, listening. For a long moment, nothing, only the pounding of their own hearts. Then, snap. A branch cracked in the trees just beyond the firelight. Ramirez swung his rifle toward the sound. "Something sips out there." The sergeant gave a sharp nod, motioning two men forward. They advanced slowly, boots crunching on leaves, the beam of a flashlight slicing into the dark. At first, nothing, just shadows. Then the light caught something. Two glowing eyes, reflecting like an animal's. But these weren't low to the ground like a deer or wolf. They were high, far higher than any man's. The soldiers froze. The eyes blinked, then vanished. Suddenly the forest erupted with movement. A blur of pale limbs shot between the trees, impossibly fast. The men opened fire, bullets tearing into the night, muzzle flashes lighting up twisted shapes darting just out of sight. The forest fell silent again. Breathing hard, the squad regrouped at the fire, weapons shaking in their hands. "Did we hit it?" Collins muttered, eyes darting. "No," the sergeant said, his voice low. "It sets toying with us." Then came the smell, a stench so strong it made their stomachs turn rotting flesh, damp earth, and coppery blood all mixed together. It rolled over them like a suffocating wave. "God." Ramirez gagged, covering his mouth. A low growl vibrated from the tree line, and then they saw it. The creature stepped into the edge of the firelight. It was tall, at least 10 feet, its limbs impossibly long and thin, skin stretched tight over bones. Its chest heaved with unnatural breaths, ribs visible even in the dim light. Its head was skull-like, deer antlers curling upward, jagged and broken. The face was a horrific mix of man and beast, with empty sockets glowing faintly red. Its mouth hung open, revealing jagged teeth too large for its jaw, dripping with saliva. The soldiers froze in primal terror. Their instincts screamed that what stood before them was not of this world. The Wendigo tilted its head, studying them like prey. Then it let out another scream, this one so piercing and guttural that every man felt it in his chest. "Fire!" the sergeant shouted. Gunfire erupted, bullets tore into the creature, but it didn't fall. It barely flinched, moving with inhuman speed. One moment it was standing in the firelight, the next it was among them. Collins was the first to go. The creature's clawed hand lashed out, swiping across his chest. His scream was cut short as his body hit the ground, torn open. The squad scattered in chaos. Ramirez opened fire point blank, bullets ripping into its torso. The Wendigo shrieked but didn't fall. It grabbed him by the throat, lifted him like a child's toy, and flung him against a tree with bone-snapping force. "Fall back," the sergeant yelled. The survivors scrambled into the trees, abandoning the fire. The darkness swallowed them instantly. Behind them, the creature's howl shook the forest, echoing for miles. Private Dawson stumbled through the brush, gasping for breath. His rifle clutched tight. Branches whipped his face. He glanced back and froze. The Wendigo was there, not running, not chasing, just standing watching. It moved unnaturally, its long limbs bending at wrong angles as it slithered forward. Its glowing eyes never left his. Dawson screamed and fired wildly, bullets spraying the dark, but the last thing he heard was the sound of claws ripping through flesh. The others regrouped a short distance away, hearts pounding, eyes wide with shock. Only half the squad remained. The Sergeant Sepp's face was pale, but his voice stayed firm. "Listen to me. That thing isn't set an animal. It isn't set an human, but it bleeds. We can kill it." Even as he said it, they all knew the truth. The Wendigo wasn't just hunting them, it was enjoying the hunt. And now it had tasted their blood. The soldiers had entered its woods, and it wasn't Set going to let them leave. The soldiers didn't sleep that night. They couldn't Set. The forest around them felt alive, breathing, listening, waiting. The fire they had abandoned still flickered weakly in the distance, but none dared return. Instead, they regrouped in a hollow between tall trees, whispering to one another, weapons clutched so tight their knuckles turned white. Only 5 of them remained now. Sergeant Miller, jaw clenched, was the only one keeping them from total panic. He crouched low, motioning for silence. "Listen, that thing, whatever it is, it bleeds. We can kill it, but we need to move carefully. Stick together. No more running blind. We keep our backs to each other and wait for an opening." Ramirez, still shaken and coughing from where he sat been slammed into a tree, shook his head. His eyes were wide, wild. "You didn't see it up close." "I did. I put half a mag into its chest. Didn't Set even slow down. It sets not killable." "Shut it," Miller hissed. "If we panic, we start dead." The forest answered with silence. Too much silence. Not a single cricket. Not a single owl. Just the faint whistle of wind through the trees. Then a sound. Click. Like bone snapping. Every man froze, rifles swinging toward the darkness. From somewhere beyond the tree line, something scraped against bark, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging down wood. "It's playing with us," muttered Dawson, his voice trembling. Another sound came, this time from behind them, leaves crunching, a heavy, uneven footstep. Then from the left, a low growl. The Wendigo wasn't rushing them this time. It was circling, herding, drawing them deeper into the woods. "Stay tight," Miller ordered. They moved, slowly, in a ring formation. Every man's back covered, rifles aimed outward, flashlights cut through the trees, their beams shaking with nervous hands. But the deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. And the noises followed, always just out of sight. "Where is it?" Collins whispered, his voice cracking. "Why doesn't Set it just crash?" The sound of something huge, slamming into a tree, snapped through the night. Branches rained down, some nearly hitting them. "Move," Miller barked. They stumbled forward, but the Wendigo was driving them. Every step they took, it answered with another crash, another sound from a different direction. It was funneling them into its hunting ground. Then silence again. For a heartbeat, they thought maybe it had gone, until a scream ripped through the night. Private Dawson, at the rear, was gone. One moment he had been there, the next vanished. His scream echoed as something dragged him into the shadows. The sound cut off with a sickening snap. The squad whirled, guns firing into the dark. But there was no target, just Dawson's helmet rolling out of the trees. blood smeared across its surface. Jesus Christ. Ramirez whispered, trembling. Keep moving, Miller ordered, though his own voice shook now. They stumbled deeper into the woods, adrenaline pushing them forward, but the Wendigo was always there. A shadow gliding between trees, a glimpse of glowing eyes, the sound of breathing so close it seemed to come from behind their own necks. Every time they stopped, something happened. A branch snapping, a rock thrown from the dark, a low growl vibrating through the ground. It wasn't set attacking, not yet. It was exhausting them, breaking them down. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. Moonlight spilled across an old, rotting log cabin, long abandoned. Its windows were shattered, the door hanging crookedly. Inside, Miller ordered. They rushed in, slamming what was left of the door behind them. The cabin smelled of mold and decay, but at least it gave the illusion of shelter. For a moment, they breathed. Collins sat against the wall, his chest heaving. We stir dead, Sarge. We stir all dead. You saw what it did to Dawson, to Johnson, to Johnson. Shut it, Miller snapped. But even he couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. Then the scratching began. Slow, deliberate, nails against the cabin walls. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It circled the cabin, dragging its claws along the wood, the sound vibrating through the rotting boards. The soldiers raised their rifles, but where would they aim? Every side was surrounded. Something slammed against the wall, shaking dust from the rafters. Pod. Another hit. This time on the other side. Hold your fire, Miller whispered. But then came the sound that broke them. The voice. It wasn't Sid the Wendigo screaming this time. It was Dawson. Help me. The soldiers froze. The voice came from just outside the door. It was weak, broken, but it was him. Dawson, Ramirez whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Miller raised a hand. Donistet. Sid's not him. But it's his voice, Collins said, desperation breaking through his fear. No, that thing it mimics. It wants you to open that door. The voice came again. Please, it's so dark. I can feel my legs. Collins broke. He rushed for the door. Collins. No, Miller shouted. But it was too late. The door flew open. Collins stepped into the night, only to be snatched by a blur of pale claws. His scream ripped through the trees before being cut short. Blood sprayed across the cabin's doorway. Ramirez fell to his knees, sobbing. The scratching stopped. The woods went quiet again. And then just beyond the tree line, the Wendigo appeared. It stood in the moonlight, tall and skeletal, blood dripping from its claws. Its empty sockets glowed faintly red as it stared at the survivors. Slowly, it raised its head and let out a scream so loud, so horrific, the cabin walls shook. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The cabin was falling apart before the soldiers had even entered it, and now, under the weight of the Wendigo's presence, it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. The flickering moonlight through the broken window panes cast jagged shadows across the rotten floorboards, and every soldier inside knew this wasn't shelter. It was a coffin. Sergeant Miller pressed his back to the wall, rifle raised, eyes darting between every crack in the wood. His voice was low, calm, but laced with strain. Stay sharp, it sits trying to get in our heads. That thing doesn't just hunt with its claws. It hunts with fear. Don said, give it an opening. Ramirez wasn't listening. He was rocking back and forth, whispering prayers under his breath, clutching his rifle as though it were a cross. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. But it was real. The Wendigo circled the cabin slowly, its claws dragging across the wood with that awful, deliberate scrape. The sound vibrated through the boards, making the men's teeth chatter. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Then came a knock. Gentle, almost polite. 3 slow taps on the wall just beside the door. Don move, Miller hissed. But the Wendigo wasn't stopping there. The knocking shifted to the window, then the opposite wall. Then the roof, always 3 knocks. As though mocking them. As though testing every side. every weakness. Suddenly, a massive crash shook the cabin. Dust and wood rained down as something landed heavily on the roof. The rafters groaned under the weight. "It's on top of us," Collins shouted, raising his rifle. "Hold fire," Miller barked. Dawn set waste ammo. The sound of claws scraped overhead, pacing. Boards cracked, threatening to snap. Then, silence. For a long, dreadful moment, the soldiers stood frozen. The only sounds were their ragged breaths and the wind outside. Then the Wendigo screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was something deeper, older, a sound of hunger and rage that rattled their bones. Windows shattered inward, showering them with glass. Ramirez screamed, firing wildly toward the broken frame, muzzle flashes lighting up his terror-stricken face. "Cease fire! It's not inside yet," Miller shouted, yanking Ramirez back. But the Wendigo was clever. It didn't lunge, it didn't rush in blindly. Instead, a pale, skeletal arm snaked through the broken window, claws groping the air, searching. The soldiers backed away. But the claw kept swiping, reaching further, nearly snagging Ramirez by the vest before Miller shoved him aside. The arm withdrew. For a moment, they thought maybe it had given up. Then came the voices again. "Help me." It was Dawson's voice, clearer now, calling from the forest. Collins shook his head violently, tears streaming. "No, no, no. He sits dead. We saw it take him. He sits dead." But the voice was relentless. "It's Sepp's so cold, please. I don't let Sepp want to die out here." Then another voice, Johnson Sepp's, the one who had been ripped apart near the fire. His words were broken, gurgling, but unmistakable. "Please, let me in." The soldiers froze. Both voices came from outside the shattered window. Both voices sounded desperate, human. Ramirez broke. "It's them. It's gotta be them." He rushed forward before Miller could stop him, reaching for the window. The Wendigo Sit's claw shot in again, lightning fast. This time it caught him. Ramirez screamed as the talons sank into his shoulder and yanked him violently upward. Miller grabbed him by the leg, but the strength of the creature was overwhelming. Ramirez's screams rose to a horrifying pitch as he was dragged through the window frame, his blood spraying across the walls. His cries didn't stop as he was pulled into the forest. They only stopped when there was a sickening crack. The cabin fell silent again. Only 3 soldiers remained: Miller, Collins, and Harper, the quietest of the group, who hadn't spoken since they first saw the creature. His face was pale, eyes locked on the blood dripping down the wall. Miller gritted his teeth. "It wants us to panic. It wants us to make mistakes. We hold this cabin. We don't give it another body." But even as he spoke, the Wendigo resumed its siege. Thud. The door shook violently, the hinges groaning. The thud, another hit, splintering the wood. The soldiers raised their rifles, ready. The Wendigo screamed again, so loud the roof sagged. The beast stood there, silhouetted in moonlight, taller than any man, its skeletal frame draped in rotting flesh. Antlers jutted from its skull, its eyes burning faintly red. Blood dripped from its claws as it stepped inside. For 1 second, the soldiers froze in primal terror. Then Miller shouted, "Fire!" Bullets ripped through the air, slamming into the Wendigo's chest and head. The creature staggered but did not fall. It shrieked in fury, rushing forward. Its claws tore through the table, sending splinters flying. Harper fired point blank into its skull, but the Wendigo backhanded him across the cabin, his body slamming into the wall with a crunch. "Fall back," Miller screamed, dragging Collins toward the rear door. But before they could reach it, the Wendigo slashed downward, its claw tearing through Collins's back. Collins screamed, blood spraying across the floor, before collapsing in Miller's arms. The sergeant fired again and again into the beast's face, each shot blasting chunks of flesh away, but the Wendigo didn't stop. It only grew angrier. With no choice, Miller shoved Collins's lifeless body aside and dove through the back window, glass tearing his uniform as he rolled into the dirt. He scrambled to his feet, turning back just in time to see the cabin walls shake as the Wendigo roared inside. Miller's chest heaved. He was the last one now. The others were gone. The Wendigo had what it wanted, but the hunt was over. It wanted him too. Sergeant Miller stumbled through the trees, his breath ragged, his legs burning with every step. The night air bit at his skin, cold enough to sting, but it was nothing compared to the chill gnawing at his bones, the weight of knowing he was utterly alone. The forest around him stretched endlessly, black trunks like prison bars, mist curling low across the ground. Behind him, in the distance, the cabin burned. The Wendigo had set it aflame, somehow, some way, as if to erase all evidence of what had happened there. The fire's glow licked the horizon, a reminder of his squadmates consumed by the nightmare. Miller pressed his hand to his side. Blood soaked his uniform, warm against the cold night. A gash from when he dove through the window still leaked steadily, and every heartbeat felt like it pushed him closer to collapse. But stopping meant death, worse than death. The Wendigo was out there. He could hear it. At first, it was just the crunch of snow somewhere behind him. Then the snapping of branches, deliberate and slow. The creature wasn't rushing him. It was following him, step for step, keeping just enough distance. Hunting him the way a predator draws out the final moments of prey, savoring the fear. Miller forced himself deeper into the woods, his rifle clutched tight. He checked the magazine, half empty. Not enough. He knew, deep down, bullets weren't going to kill that thing. But holding the weapon gave him something to cling to, a lifeline against despair. The deeper he went, the stranger the forest became. The trees twisted unnaturally, roots rising like claws from the soil. The silence pressed against his ears until it felt like he was underwater. No owls, no wind, only his labored breathing and the faint tap of claws on bark somewhere behind him. Then came the voices again. "Sergeant." It was Ramirez's voice, weak, trembling. "Help me, please, don't vets leave me." Miller froze, his stomach twisting. The voice was coming from just ahead, deeper in the mist. For a moment he almost believed it, almost thought maybe Ramirez had escaped, maybe there was a chance. But then another voice joined in. Collins. His words were broken, slurred, as though spoken through a ruined throat. "It hurts, why didn't set you save me?" Miller shook his head violently. "No, you stirred dead. You stirred all dead." The voices didn't stop. They multiplied. Dawson, Johnson, Harper, all of them calling his name, begging, accusing, laughing. Their voices overlapped until the forest rang with a chorus of the dead. Miller dropped to his knees, clutching his head, fighting to shut them out. He wanted to scream, but he knew if he made a sound, the Wendigo would come closer. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw it, just at the edge of the mist. Tall, gaunt, bones stretched tight under sickly pale flesh, antlers twisting from its skull like the branches of a dead tree, its glowing eyes locked onto him. It didn't move. It just watched. Miller forced himself up, stumbling forward. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, but the forest seemed to close in around him. The trees grew tighter, the underbrush thicker, his boots snagged on roots, his lungs burned. Behind him, the Wendigo began to follow again. Not rushing, just walking. The hunt was deliberate. The monster didn't want this to end quickly. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the endless dark. Miller's body screamed for rest, but every time he slowed, he heard the faint growl behind him, pushing him onward. Finally, he stumbled into a clearing. At its center stood an old stone circle, moss-covered, ancient. He recognized it instantly, the same unnatural formations they had seen earlier, symbols carved into the forest itself. Except this one was larger, more deliberate. Bones hung from the trees surrounding it, strung together with sinew like grotesque wind chimes. The air here felt heavier, colder, charged with something wrong. And Miller understood. This was where the creature had led them from the start. He wasn't running from it, he was being herded. The realization froze his blood. He raised his rifle, aiming wildly at the tree line. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Come on, you want me, come and take me." The forest went silent again. Then, from every side, the voices rose once more. His squad, his friends. Their words slithered into his mind, cutting deeper than claws ever could. You left us. You ran while we screamed. You shall never leave these woods. Miller Sepp's hands shook. His rifle barrel wavered. And then the Wendigo stepped into the clearing. This time, it didn't hold back. It came forward, towering over him, each step deliberate, claws glinting in the pale moonlight. Its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth dripping with blood. The smell hit him then. The stench of rot, of flesh, long decayed. Miller fired, once, twice, 3 times. The bullets slammed into the creature's chest and skull, tearing flesh, spraying black ichor. But it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. The Wendigo only smiled. That hideous, inhuman grin stretched across its ruined face. And Miller knew. There would be no escape. No rescue. No dawn. The woods had claimed him, just as they had claimed the rest. And somewhere, deep inside the creature's growl, he thought he heard his own voice joining the others. The night had grown unbearably still. The forest, once alive with wind, insects, and the occasional crack of branches, now sat under a suffocating silence, like the world itself was holding its breath. The soldiers, what remained of them, huddled together in a loose circle near the remains of their dying campfire. Every one of them was exhausted, physically, mentally, spiritually. Their clothes were torn, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes rimmed with red from lack of sleep and the endless horror of pursuit. The Wendigo was still out there, watching, waiting. It never attacked in daylight, but now, with the last embers of the fire dying and shadows swallowing the trees, the men knew they had no more time left. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the trees bending like silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Sergeant Miller tightened his grip on his rifle, though he knew deep down that bullets had done little against the monster. His hands trembled, whether from the cold or from fear, he couldn't tell. "We make our stand here," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We can keep running." No one argued. They all knew it was true. The Wendigo was faster, stronger, tireless. Running only prolonged the inevitable. If they were going to die, they would die facing it. Private Henderson tried to stoke the fire, but the wood was too damp, too weak to catch. Sparks flared and died in the wind. The soldiers looked at one another, the flickering glow casting hollow shadows across their faces. Then it began, a sound, low, almost too low to hear at first. A groan? No, a growl. It rose and rose, the guttural rumble of something unnatural, something hungry, the Wendigo's call. Every hair on the back of their necks stood up. The sound came from the darkness beyond the tree line, but the forest was so thick that no one could tell where exactly. One moment it was to the left, then behind them, then to the right, circling them, closing in. "Hold your fire," Miller ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. The growl turned into something worse, a shriek, piercing, unnatural, a scream that echoed like dozens of voices layered over each other. Men, women, children, crying out in agony. It wasn't just a noise, it was pain-made sound. Some of the men covered their ears, but the scream was inside their heads as much as around them. And then the forest broke open. The Wendigo charged out of the darkness, its massive form lit in fleeting glimpses by the struggling fire. Its limbs were impossibly long, its gaunt chest stretched with skin like old parchment, its skull-like face twisted in hunger. Its eyes, those glowing, soulless white eyes, locked onto the soldiers. "Fire!" Miller roared. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the silence of the woods. Muzzle flashes lit up the trees, bullets tearing into the monster's body, but the Wendigo didn't fall. It staggered, shrieked, and lunged forward, faster than anything that size should move. Private Carter screamed as claws like knives tore across his chest, lifting him off the ground and flinging him like a rag doll into the trees. His scream was cut short by a sickening crack. The soldiers fired again, panic taking over discipline. The Wendigo swiped with its arms, knocking Henderson to the ground, its talon piercing through him as if he were made of paper. Blood sprayed across the dirt, steaming in the cold night air. "Keep firing," Miller shouted, emptying his rifle until the click of an empty magazine betrayed his futility. The monster turned toward him, its jaw unhinging wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. And then something unexpected. The fire, those last struggling embers, suddenly flared, a gust of wind. No, it was as if the forest itself wanted to help. The flames rose high, casting the clearing in blazing orange. The Wendigo hissed and drew back, its skin blistering where the light touched. "Light, it fears the fire," Miller yelled. The soldiers scrambled, pulling anything they could, branches, rags, even parts of their uniforms, setting them ablaze. Makeshift torches burned as they waved them wildly, pushing back the shadows. The Wendigo screeched, retreating into the tree line, but it wasn't gone. Its glowing eyes lingered, glaring from the darkness. The survivors, Miller, Corporal Davis, and 2 privates, stood shoulder to shoulder, torches in hand, daring it to come closer. And then Miller did something reckless. He stepped forward, torch raised high. "Come on, you bastard," he growled. "Come and take me." The Wendigo moved like lightning, bursting from the trees in one final charge. Miller didn't flinch. He jammed the torch straight into the creature's chest, shoving with all his strength. The monster let out a shriek so loud it rattled the earth, flames licking across its body as its skin split and burned. The others joined in, pressing torches against its limbs, its face. The smell of burning flesh filled the clearing. The Wendigo thrashed violently, but the fire consumed it, spreading faster and hotter until the beast collapsed into the dirt, writhing, screaming, until finally, mercifully, it was silent. The soldiers staggered back, breathing hard, eyes wide in disbelief. The Wendigo's body smoldered, curling in on itself until it was nothing more than ash. Silence returned to the forest, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful, almost sacred. Miller dropped to his knees, his torch falling from his trembling hand. The others followed, too drained to speak. They had survived. Barely. But as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, a chilling thought settled in Miller's mind. The Wendigo was dead, but its screams, those layered voices of countless victims, it meant that there had been more than one. And maybe there still were. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun.